high-value woman does not raise her voice to be heard. She raises her standards. She understands something most people miss. Communication is not about controlling the other person. It's about revealing who you are. And when she speaks to a man, she is not trying to impress him, win him, or keep him. She is simply showing him the level at which she operates. She doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't chase clarity. She doesn't shrink to be liked. Instead, she speaks from a place of certainty. I don't need you to complete me. I need you to meet me where I stand. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. Because a high-value woman knows that the right man isn't confused by her standards. He's elevated by them. She doesn't speak in circles. She speaks in truth. If something bothers me, I will tell you. Not to fight, but to fix. Not to blame, but to build. There's no manipulation in her words, no hidden agendas, no games. Because she knows the moment you start playing games, you lose authenticity. And once authenticity is gone, respect follows. She chooses clarity over comfort. If you're unsure about me, that's okay, but I won't stay where I'm not chosen. Read that again. That's power. She is not afraid of losing someone who cannot recognize her value. Because deep down, she understands something most people spend years learning. Rejection is not loss, it's direction. And when she speaks, she doesn't rush. She pauses, she listens, she observes, because she knows silence reveals more than noise ever could. Show me who you are through your actions, not just your words. She watches consistency, not intensity. Anyone can be good for a moment, but she's not looking for moments, she's looking for patterns. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think high-value women are hard to love. No, they're just hard to fool. She doesn't need constant reassurance. She needs consistency. She doesn't need grand gestures. She needs grounded presence. Be real with me, that's enough. Simple, direct, unshakable. And if a man cannot meet her there, she doesn't argue, she doesn't convince, she doesn't chase. She walks not because she doesn't care, but because she cares enough about herself to leave what doesn't align. That's the difference. A high-value woman doesn't speak to control the outcome. She speaks to express her truth. And the right man, he doesn't feel threatened by that. He feels challenged, inspired, called forward, because real connection doesn't come from pretending. It comes from standing fully in who you are and allowing the other person to do the same. That's how high-value women speak, not louder, not harsher, just clearer. Speaking with purpose instead of seeking approval is one of the rarest and most powerful shifts a person can make, because most people are unconsciously trained to filter their words through the lens of, will I be liked, rather than, is this true, necessary, and aligned with who I am? And that subtle difference changes everything about how you show up in conversations, relationships, and life decisions. When you speak for approval, your words become negotiable, your tone becomes hesitant, and your message becomes diluted, shaped more by fear than by clarity, which people can sense instantly, even if they don't consciously realize it. And over time, this creates a quiet erosion of respect, not just from others, but from yourself. Because every time you hold back your truth to avoid discomfort, you reinforce the belief that your voice is only valuable when it is accepted. On the other hand, when you speak with purpose, something fundamentally different happens, because your words are no longer trying to win people over. They are trying to express something real, something grounded, something that reflects your standards, your boundaries, and your perspective. And that kind of communication carries weight even in silence, because it is anchored in conviction rather than reaction. Purpose-driven speech does not mean being aggressive, rude, or dismissive. It means being clear, intentional, and honest without the need to over-explain or justify your position. And this clarity removes confusion from your interactions, because people no longer have to guess what you mean or where you stand. It also filters your environment in a powerful way, because the right people will respect and resonate with your directness, while the wrong ones may feel uncomfortable or even resistant. But that discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are no longer bending to fit spaces that were never aligned with you. Many people fear that if they stop seeking approval, they will lose connection. But the truth is the opposite, because real connection is built on authenticity, not performance. And when you stop performing for acceptance, you create space for relationships that are based on truth rather than illusion. Speaking with purpose also requires courage, because there will be moments where your honesty creates tension, where your boundaries are questioned, and where your clarity is misunderstood. But those moments are not setbacks. They are confirmations that you are no longer living on autopilot. And over time, that courage compounds into confidence, not the loud, attention-seeking kind, but the quiet, unshakable kind that does not need validation to exist. This shift also changes how you listen, because when you are not preoccupied with how you are being perceived, you become more present, more attentive, and more capable of understanding others without immediately preparing a response that protects your image. And this deeper level of listening strengthens your communication even further, because it allows your responses to be thoughtful rather than reactive. Ultimately, speaking with purpose is about alignment, aligning your words with your values, your actions with your intentions, and your presence with your identity. And once that alignment is in place, you no longer feel the need to chase approval, because you realize that approval is temporary and external, while purpose is internal and enduring. And when you operate from that place, your voice becomes not just heard, but respected. Not because it pleases everyone, but because it represents something real, something grounded, and something that does not change depending on who is in the room. Setting boundaries without apology is one of the clearest indicators of self-respect, yet it is something many people struggle with, because they have been conditioned to believe that protecting their time, energy, and emotional space is somehow selfish or inconsiderate, when in reality the opposite is true, because without boundaries, relationships become imbalanced, expectations become unclear, and resentment quietly begins to grow beneath the surface. When you constantly explain, justify, or soften your limits to make others comfortable, you unintentionally send a message that your needs are negotiable, that your standards can be adjusted, and that your space is available for negotiation. And over time, people respond to that message exactly as it is delivered. Not because they are intentionally disrespectful, but because you have trained them to see your boundaries as flexible rather than firm. Setting boundaries without apology does not mean being cold, distant, or unkind. It means being clear and direct about what is acceptable and what is not, without attaching guilt or over-explanation to your decision, because the moment you start apologizing for your boundaries, you shift the focus away from your values and place it onto the other person's comfort, which weakens the boundary before it even has a chance to stand. There is a quiet power in saying no without a long explanation, in stepping back without creating a dramatic narrative, and in choosing yourself without feeling the need to seek permission for it, because boundaries are not requests, they are decisions, and decisions do not require validation to be valid. Many people fear that setting firm boundaries will push others away, but what it actually does is reveal who is willing to respect you and who is benefiting from your lack of limits. And while that realization can be uncomfortable, it is also necessary, because it allows you to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than silent compromise. When you stop apologizing for your boundaries, you also stop overextending yourself to maintain connections that drain you, and instead you begin to invest your time and energy into spaces where your presence is valued, not exploited. This shift also changes how you carry yourself, because there is a noticeable difference between someone who is unsure about their limits and someone who is grounded in them. And that difference is felt in tone, in posture, and in the way they respond to pressure, because they are no longer trying to avoid conflict at all costs. They are choosing alignment over approval. Boundaries without apology also create clarity, not just for you, but for the people around you. Because when expectations are clearly defined, there is less room for misunderstanding, less room for frustration, and more room for healthy interaction. And this clarity strengthens relationships that are meant to last, while naturally distancing those that rely on blurred lines and unspoken compromises. It is important to understand that not everyone will like your boundaries, and that is not a problem to solve, because your responsibility is not to manage everyone's reactions. It is to protect your well-being and stay aligned with your values. And once you accept that, you stop seeing discomfort as something to avoid and start seeing it as part of growth. Setting boundaries without apology is not about building walls, it is about creating structure. A structure that allows you to show up fully without feeling depleted, to give without feeling taken from, and to connect without losing yourself in the process. And over time, this practice reinforces a deeper sense of confidence. Because every time you honor your limits, you prove to yourself that your needs matter, that your voice has weight, and that your presence is not something that needs to be negotiated in order to be respected. It simply needs to be clearly defined and consistently upheld. Leading with calm confidence instead of loud dominance is a quiet shift that completely transforms how power is expressed and perceived. Because most people confuse authority with volume, believing that the louder voice, the stronger presence, or the more forceful personality automatically commands respect, when in reality, true influence rarely needs to announce itself. Loud dominance often comes from a need to control outcomes, to overpower uncertainty, or to mask insecurity. And while it may create temporary compliance, it rarely builds lasting respect or trust, because people can feel when energy is forced rather than grounded. Calm confidence, on the other hand, does not rush, does not prove, and does not compete for attention. It simply exists, steady and certain, allowing actions and consistency to speak louder than any raised voice ever could. When you lead from this place, your words carry weight, not because they are loud, but because they are intentional, measured, and aligned with your values, and that alignment creates a sense of stability that others naturally respond to. There is something deeply compelling about someone who does not feel the need to dominate a room to be noticed, someone who listens fully before speaking, who responds rather than reacts, and who maintains composure even in moments of pressure, because that composure signals control, not over others, but over self. And self-mastery is the foundation of real leadership. Calm confidence also creates psychological safety in conversations because it removes the tension that comes with aggressive or overpowering communication, making it easier for others to express themselves honestly without fear of being shut down or dismissed. And this openness leads to better understanding, stronger collaboration, and more meaningful connection. It is not about being passive or avoiding difficult conversations. It is about approaching them with clarity and steadiness, addressing issues directly without escalating emotions unnecessarily, and holding your position without needing to force agreement. This approach does not weaken your authority, it strengthens it, because people are far more likely to respect someone who can remain grounded under pressure than someone who relies on intensity to maintain control. Leading with calm confidence also means being comfortable with silence, not feeling the need to fill every gap with words or to constantly assert your presence, because you understand that presence is not measured by how much you say, but by how you make others feel and how consistently you show up. It requires trust in yourself, trust that you do not need to compete for validation or prove your worth in every interaction. And that trust allows you to move through situations with a sense of ease rather than urgency. Over time, this way of leading builds a reputation that speaks for itself, one where your consistency becomes your credibility and your actions become your message, and people begin to look to you not because you demand attention, but because your presence feels reliable, clear, and grounded. Loud dominance may capture attention for a moment, but calm confidence earns respect over time. And that respect is far more powerful because it is freely given, not forced. When you embody this approach, you shift from trying to control how others perceive you to focusing on how you show up. And in doing so, you create a form of leadership that is not dependent on external validation, but rooted in internal stability. And that stability becomes the foundation for influence that is both quiet and undeniable, shaping interactions, decisions, and relationships in a way that does not need to be announced to be felt. Communicating expectations clearly and directly is one of the most underrated forms of respect, both for yourself and for others. Yet it is often avoided because people fear coming across as too demanding, too serious, or too confrontational, when in reality, unclear expectations are what create confusion, frustration, and unnecessary conflict in the first place. When expectations are left unspoken, people are forced to guess, and those guesses are shaped by their own experiences, assumptions, and interpretations, which rarely align perfectly with yours. And this gap between what is expected and what is understood becomes the silent source of disappointment in many relationships, whether personal or professional. Clarity removes that gap, because it replaces assumption with understanding, and understanding creates alignment, which is the foundation of any strong and functional connection. Speaking directly does not mean being harsh or insensitive. It means being precise about what you need, what you value, and what you will and will not accept, without wrapping your message in unnecessary ambiguity or softening it to the point where it loses meaning. Many people dilute their communication by over-explaining, hinting instead of stating, or hoping that others will just understand, but hope is not a communication strategy, and indirect language often leads to misinterpretation rather than harmony. When you communicate expectations with clarity, you create a shared standard, a clear understanding of how things operate, and this clarity reduces tension because it removes the uncertainty that often leads to overthinking and miscommunication. It also demonstrates confidence, because direct communication signals that you are comfortable with your needs and unafraid to express them. And that confidence naturally commands respect, not because it demands it, but because it is grounded in honesty. There is also an efficiency in clear communication that people often overlook, because it saves time, energy, and emotional effort by addressing things at the root, rather than allowing them to grow into larger issues over time. Instead of revisiting the same misunderstandings repeatedly, you set a standard once and reinforce it through consistency. And that consistency builds trust because people know where you stand and what to expect from you. Communicating expectations clearly also holds you accountable, because once you define your standards, you are responsible for upholding them. And this alignment between what you say and what you do strengthens your credibility, making your words more impactful over time. It is important to understand that not everyone will immediately meet your expectations, and some may even resist them, especially if they are used to ambiguity or flexibility. But resistance is not a reason to retreat into unclear communication. It is simply part of the adjustment process, and those who value the relationship will adapt, while those who do not will naturally fall away. Direct communication also encourages reciprocity, because when you are clear about your expectations, it invites others to express theirs, creating a balanced dynamic where both sides feel heard and understood, rather than one-sided or assumed. This exchange builds stronger connections because it is based on transparency rather than guesswork, and transparency fosters trust, which is essential for any meaningful interaction. Ultimately, communicating expectations clearly and directly is not about controlling others. It is about creating an environment where clarity replaces confusion, where honesty replaces assumption, and where respect is built through understanding rather than negotiation. And when you consistently operate from this place, you not only improve your relationships, but you also reinforce a deeper sense of self-respect, because you are no longer waiting for others to figure you out. You are showing them exactly who you are and what you stand for through words that are clear, grounded, and aligned with your values. Valuing self-respect over validation is a defining shift that separates those who are guided by their inner standards from those who are shaped by external approval. Because the pursuit of validation is subtle, addictive, and often disguised as connection, success, or acceptance. Yet beneath it lies a dependency that weakens your sense of identity over time. When you seek validation, your decisions begin to orbit around how they will be perceived. Your words become carefully edited to avoid rejection, and your actions slowly drift away from authenticity toward performance. And while this may create temporary acceptance, it comes at the cost of self-trust, because every time you prioritize being liked over being real, you send a message to yourself that your truth is secondary to someone else's opinion. Self-respect operates differently, because it is not dependent on applause, agreement, or recognition. It is rooted in alignment, in knowing who you are, what you stand for, and what you will not compromise, regardless of how it is received. And that alignment creates a stability that external validation can never provide, because validation fluctuates while self-respect remains steady. Choosing self-respect means making decisions that honor your values even when they are misunderstood, even when they are inconvenient, and even when they come with the risk of disapproval. And this is where most people hesitate, because disapproval feels like loss, but in reality it is a filter separating what aligns with you from what does not. When you prioritize validation, you often stay in spaces that do not respect you, accept behavior that does not meet your standards, and silence parts of yourself to maintain approval. And over time, this creates an internal conflict. a quiet dissatisfaction that cannot be resolved through more validation because the root issue is misalignment, not lack of acceptance. Valuing self-respect requires a different kind of courage. The courage to be seen as different, to stand alone when necessary, and to walk away from anything that requires you to shrink in order to belong. And while this path may feel uncomfortable at first, it leads to a deeper sense of confidence. Because your worth is no longer tied to fluctuating opinions, it is anchored in your own standards. This shift also changes how you interpret rejection, because instead of seeing it as a reflection of your value, you begin to see it as information, as a sign that something is not aligned, and this perspective removes the emotional weight that often comes with not being chosen, allowing you to move forward without questioning your worth. Self-respect also influences how others treat you, because people respond to the standards you set and the behavior you tolerate, and when you consistently choose yourself, when you enforce your boundaries and honor your values, you create an environment where respect becomes the baseline rather than something you have to earn through approval-seeking behavior. It is not about becoming indifferent to others or dismissing their perspectives. It is about ensuring that their opinions do not override your sense of self, that you can listen without losing your position, and that you can adapt without abandoning your core. Over time, valuing self-respect over validation builds a quiet, unshakable confidence, the kind that does not need to be announced or proven, because it is reflected in consistency, in the way you show up, in the decisions you make, and in the standards you uphold, and this consistency becomes your identity, something that cannot be easily influenced or diminished by external noise. Ultimately, when you choose self-respect, you are choosing long-term alignment over short-term approval, depth over surface-level acceptance, and authenticity over performance. And while this path may not always be the easiest, it is the one that leads to genuine confidence, meaningful relationships, and a life that feels true to who you are, rather than shaped by who others expect you to be. Inspiring through authenticity instead of chasing perfection is a powerful shift that changes not only how others perceive you, but how deeply they connect with you. Because perfection creates distance while authenticity creates trust. And in a world where people are constantly filtering, editing, and presenting polished versions of themselves, what stands out is not flawlessness, but realness. Perfection is often an illusion built on fear, the fear of being judged, rejected, or seen as inadequate. And when you operate from that fear, your focus shifts from expressing truth to maintaining an image, which leads to overthinking, hesitation, and a constant pressure to get everything exactly right. And that pressure disconnects you from your natural voice, making your communication feel controlled rather than genuine. Authenticity works differently, because it is not about getting everything right. It is about being honest about where you are, what you know, what you are learning, and even where you fall short. And this honesty resonates on a deeper level because people do not relate to perfection. They relate to experience, to growth, and to the process of becoming. When you allow yourself to be authentic, you give others permission to do the same. And that creates an environment where connection is based on truth rather than comparison, where people feel seen rather than judged, and where inspiration comes from relatability rather than unattainable standards. Many people believe that they need to appear perfect to be respected or admired, but in reality, perfection often creates pressure rather than inspiration, because it sets a standard that feels impossible to reach, while authenticity shows a path that others can actually follow, a path that includes challenges, mistakes, and progress. And that is what truly motivates people, seeing someone navigate reality rather than perform an ideal. Inspiring through authenticity also requires vulnerability, the willingness to be seen without the safety of a perfectly curated image. And vulnerability can feel uncomfortable because it removes the control that perfection tries to maintain, but it also builds a level of trust that cannot be achieved through polished presentation alone, because people can sense when something is real, when it is grounded in genuine experience rather than constructed for approval. This does not mean sharing everything or abandoning standards. It means being intentional about honesty, about speaking from a place that reflects your true perspective rather than what you think others want to hear. And this intention brings clarity to your message, making it more impactful because it is rooted in reality. Authenticity also allows for growth, because when you are not trying to appear perfect, you are more open to learning, adapting, and evolving, and this openness keeps you grounded, preventing the stagnation that often comes with maintaining a flawless image. Over time, this approach builds a different kind of credibility, one that is based on consistency and truth rather than appearance. And this credibility strengthens your influence because people trust not just what you say, but who you are. It is important to understand that authenticity will not appeal to everyone, and that is not a flaw, it is a filter. Because the goal is not to be universally accepted, it is to be genuinely connected with those who resonate with your message. And that resonance creates stronger, more meaningful relationships than perfection ever could. When you inspire through authenticity, you shift the focus from being impressive to being real, from being flawless to being human, and in that shift you create a presence that is not only relatable but also empowering, because it shows that strength does not come from having everything figured out. It comes from being honest, consistent, and willing to grow, and that kind of inspiration does not fade because it is not built on an image. It is built on truth that people can see, feel, and trust over time.